Now, in order to collaborate with Manuel or with anyone else, of course, I need to push my code onto GitHub. And you'll learn about GitHub in depth in this course as well. Now, what I'll do, therefore, is I'll log into GitHub here with my account. And then I want to create a new repository there. We can go to repositories, new for that. And here we can then give this a name, and I'll name it React.js food order because we're building a React.js food order app, so this sounds quite fitting. Now I can give this a short description, React.js food order dummy project. And of course we can choose whether it should be public or private. Now both would do the trick here, actually. It really depends on how you want to manage your project. We could argue it's an internal project, which should be private, but here I'm fine with public. So therefore I'll leave it like this. I'll not check any of the other options here, but instead just create that repository because I already have a local Git repository. So for example, I don't want to add a default git ignore file because I already have one. So I'll create this repository, and I'm not going to start by cloning it, because again, I already have my local repository. Instead, what I will do is I'll grab this URL and set this up as a remote repository for my project. Now we find instructions how we can do that down there, but we're simply going to walk through them together. So back in my project, I'll connect this project to this GitHub repository by running git remote add origin. That's how we can add such a remote repository, and the typical name we choose here is origin. That's kind of the convention. And then we paste in that URL. If we now hit enter, this remote is connected to this local repository. Now that this remote repository is connected, the goal of course is to push my changes to this repository. And I'll start by pushing the main branch so that Manuel is also able to work with this initial project snapshot and add his features. We're then going to merge all these features together in a future step. Now to push this main branch here, I will now run git push origin main. And this will push my main branch to the remote repository. Now, of course, for that, by the way, I assume that you did set up your general Git configuration on your system, specifically your username and your email, which you can configure with the git config command as shown earlier. It's not a must-do to set this, but it is recommended as soon as you start collaborating and sharing your code to the public. So here I'll just run git push origin main now. And if we now hit enter, here in VS Code, I actually get such a pop-up that I could sign in with help of an extension, but I'll actually choose cancel here. And then as a next step, I am prompted to enter a username. Now this is on macOS. On Windows, as you saw earlier in the course, this might look different. There we had the choice of signing in with the browser or with help of the personal access token. If I would have chosen allow on this pop-up a few seconds ago, I also could have signed in with the browser. I choose cancel though, and therefore now I can also use the personal access token. I just also have to enter my username here. This, by the way, would also be the case if you would run this git push origin main command outside of Visual Studio Code. Here I am in my regular terminal, but you could also be in the command prompt on Windows, navigate it into the project folder. I did that off screen. And if I then run git push origin main, you see I'm also prompted for the username here. So either way, I have to enter my username here, and I'll quickly do that here in VS Code, just with this overlay. So I'll enter my username here of the user with which I'm connecting. And then, more importantly, I need to enter a password. And that could be your account password, but this is not recommended and won't work anymore in the future. Instead, here, we'll use such a personal access token. Now, you learned how to get such a token before. You go to your account settings, and then there to the developer settings, where you go to personal access tokens. And here I will generate a new token and then give it any meaningful name. Here I'll name it React.js project. Of course, you could also give it the name of your local machine if you plan to use it for multiple projects. This is up to you. We can set the expiration, and I'll keep the default of 30 days here. And then I'll give it control over my repo, not over anything else. Though, of course, we could add more control if we planned to do more things with help of the CLI in the future. But for pushing, just control over the repo is enough. So I'll just check this and then generate this token. And then here I'll copy this token and use this as a password here. If I now hit enter, you see pushing this main branch succeeded. And now this main branch is on GitHub. We can see it here if I reload this newly created project. And now, of course, Manuel will be able to then clone this repository and do his work on that same repository. And then in the future, once Manuel also implemented his changes, we can merge our different feature branches together and then therefore merge all those changes back into the main branch. That's the idea of collaborating with help of GitHub. And that's what we'll now continue with in the next lectures.
With Max having finished the first part of this module, now it's time for me to also, dive into this project and collaborate in this project. Now, collaborating is not totally correct at this stage. As you saw, Max, who is the owner of this repository, did not add me as a collaborator up to now, but the project is in a public repository. Therefore, I'm able to access the code via our good old git clone command. I already am on the GitHub page of this project, and therefore what we can do now is we can go to our code button, take the URL, so this part right here, and now I can go back to Visual Studio Code where I opened an empty project already and added an empty project folder, this git-github folder up here. Now we can clone the repository, as I said, so we run git clone, paste the URL, and now as I am already inside a folder and I want to make sure that the project is cloned directly into this folder and not into another subfolder, I'll add a space and then a simple dot. With that, the project will be cloned directly, or specifically the project files will be directly cloned into this github folder. With that in place, let's see if this works. So the cloning starts. And we see that we are inside the github folder, and this folder now contains all these project files. With a check of git status, we can see that Git is running inside our project folder. Let me clear this though. My task now is to, enhance the current project in a way that I add this modal, so this overlay, so to say, which opens the card. Before we do that though, I also have to run npm install. Node.js is installed on my machine already, but to make sure we have this Node modules folder Max talked about, which is part of the gitignore file and therefore not cloned from the remote repository, this means we also run npm install in here. As Max explained, this can take a few seconds. We ran npm install successfully, so we could now also start the development server. Before we do that though, I quickly want to have a look at the current branch we are in with git branch. And we see we are inside the main branch, so everything is all right. This means by running npm start now, we start this development server, and we therefore can have a quick look at the current state of the website. This is the state. You already saw this earlier in the module when Max introduced the page to you. And our goal now is that, not once we click, this will be added a bit later, but basically we want to have this overlay, this modal, if you click onto this card button up here, to be displayed all the time basically. As I said, the core logic that it is only displayed if you click onto this card button will be implemented, or is implemented, by Max actually. Nevertheless, this is the current state. Let's now add some React.js code, and then let's continue with the actual Git and GitHub part of this course. So back in VS Code, I first will add 2 different files. You can find these files attached to this lecture. These files, I'll refer to these in a few seconds, will be added in the source folder, and there specifically in the components folder, and there we go to the card folder. At the moment we have 3 files in this folder. As I said, attached to this lecture you can find a card.js file and a card module CSS file. Please download, the corresponding zip file, unzip the files, and drag and drop these 2 files into the card folder here. I just did this, so I'm talking about these 2 files up here. This was step 1 of the React code that we added. As I said, in a real project, we would of course add the code manually. As this is not a React.js course, we prepared this code for you in these finished files already. However, this was the first change I made. Now the second step is to go into the app.js file. Remember, this is also the file Max worked in, but here we have the state of the main branch, so without Max changes being implemented. In there, our task is not a very big one, to be honest. We actually only have to add 2 things. One thing is we have to add an import up here at the top of the file, and I'll add this import below the card provider import. So here we'll type import card from, and here we'll import it from components /card and again /card. So what this import basically does is we prepared a predefined overlay here in the components card folder, and this predefined overlay is now imported into this file and can be used in here, so to say. So this was the first step. The second step now is that inside our app function, we will add a so-called card element. So we will basically use the card as part of this function. And we'll add the card element below our card provider element, and an element is simply written, like this. So we add the card, a space, and now close the element, so to say. And with that, we are finished with our changes in the app.js file already. Okay, so let's now save these changes, and let's now quickly see what our website looks like now. Yeah, this might look like an error to you, but actually this is exactly what we wanted to achieve. This is the empty card, so to say, including the overlay. And, of course, what is missing here is the step that this only opens once we click onto our card symbol here. And of course, the card also doesn't contain any data here. But this part is done by Max. This means our React.js code additions are done at this stage. And this brings us back to the actual Git and GitHub part of this course again.